Welcome to This Week in History with Mike and Will. I'm Mike.
I'm Will.
And what we do is every week we pick a day in history. Will researches it and tells me about it. And he has 1 hour to do it.
I do.
And I feel we would be remiss if we didn't mention the elephant in the room, Will's face. He's doing that for a role that he's in a play and I'm directing it. So I've directed him to do this.
Yes. And I look like a proper English gentleman now.
There we go.
That's
why. But who knows? In 2 weeks, maybe he'll fall in love with the look and he'll just keep it.
I don't think Maggie will like it, but we'll see.
Maybe she'll fall in love with it.
I also feel like
maybe I'll do it.
If I do this, I have this awesome second chin thing.
Maybe I'll join you.
Yeah, I think it's this. I could make this a popular thing.
Okay.
Bringing it back. I feel like I have to do the whole show. Back in the day, things happened for a reason.
You've only got 1 hour, Will, so you use it as you feel.
Poppycock.
You fill that hour however you feel.
I shall, thank God.
All right, are you ready? So today we're discussing the Vikings' sacking of Paris in 845 AD.
Correct.
March 29th. Let's find out.
We need a sound effect for that.
Oh.
Write that down.
Sound effect. We'll see if I can
Chunk,
do that.
chunk. We're
Sound
going to get
effects.
sued by Dick Wolf if we do that. So
I will
let's
do
not
a different sound effect.
Yes. All right. So, Vikings sacked Paris.
Vikings!
This is a big thing. So we got to talk about Vikings.
Let's talk about Vikings first.
We're talking about Paris after that. And then, so, the Vikings.
Vikings.
Who the heck are the Vikings?
I don't know. There is no Vicania.
There's no Vicania. And actually, Viking just means like seafarer. It means traveler, like explorer.
Boatman.
But of course, when you have an axe and you're an explorer, everything also becomes an opportunity to hit that thing with an axe.
Hit that
Yeah,
thing.
with an axe.
Right.
Specifically with an axe. So anyway, the Vikings were notorious for being sea raiders and murderers and marauders and all this stuff. But most of the stuff written about the Vikings is written by their victims. It's not written by the Vikings. The Vikings did not have a written language.
Oh.
All of their information is carried on through stories. By word of mouth and like meticulously kept to the point where eventually it was written down.
Okay.
But for
In
years,
a Viking language or
in English or not English, Danish, and then translated.
so they have
into
no
English.
okay.
Yeah, so the Vikings they used runes, but those largely was kind of like Eastern characters, kind of like Chinese or Japanese characters. One rune could mean several things.
Okay.
But they usually would only be referencing to the gods or like an event. It wasn't a proper language, and they would have like a law stick, they called it, with like runes written on it, and whoever held it got to talk, kind of a thing. So they have a very interesting culture. What's cool about it is it was recent enough where we can still find records, like artifacts, and they were expert craftsmen, so all their stuff lasted forever.
Oh.
So like
Sure, you could be an extra craftsman if you don't have to sit down and read all day.
Yeah, that's right. You have to be good at something, right? If we don't know how to read, we better get good at working. I don't know. So yeah, the Vikings at the time they had started to craft a different type of ship that's why they suddenly erupted out of the north. It's called the Longship.
The Longship.
The Longship, the Viking Longship. It's very famous in how it's shaped. It's got this kind of like a dragon's neck, and then it curves, and then it goes over, and it has like a tail to it.
And in between,
so
it's
kind of
really long.
And it's really long. Some of them were 100 feet long. Some of them were longer than that. I think the average was like 50 feet. You'd have like 20 guys on it. And what was
flat bottom?
It had a flat bottom, relatively flat. It had a very shallow keel, they call it. So normally when you're traveling on the sea, you need a deep bottom vessel, otherwise you flip over.
Yeah.
They somehow, trial and error, I'm sure, because where they lived was all coastal. You don't live inland in Norway. It's too freaking cold, and it's a mountain.
Yeah.
So you live in the fjords.
Fjords, next to the water, you get some fish.
You get some fish in the fjords. Yeah. And sometimes you see a fury. And then you have a different kind of fury.
That accent works with the facial hair as well.
Yeah. We're going to fish and go live in the fjord. Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm going to read with
It'll
my cousin.
It'll never stop being amusing to me.
No, I know. I'm glad you're liking it.
I
might keep it. But I went with my cousin, Finn, into the fjord. Okay. We fought the furies while we were fishing.
I've already the word fjord down.
Fjord. So fjord, excuse me, kind of a, it's a roundish cut out in the landscape, usually created by an ice flow, but it shelters the bay.
Okay.
So that's where a lot of Viking townships came up. It was safe and sheltered, and so they built a boat. You could live in there very nicely.
There's sea people.
And then you sail out of there. So they developed this new type of ship that could go on the sea and kind of just skim along the top. And they would make it either wind powered if they wanted to, and the whole mast could go up or down. So when they needed, they just laid this giant timber down.
Were there people rowing too?
Or
Is
they
that a
could
thing?
row. Yep.
Where then was there a below deck?
No. You just slept on your seat. There's not a lot of space to go. So these people were tough. Like, no matter what, they were tough.
Or sleepy.
Or very tired. Very, very tired. Like, they just sleep leaning on the oar. Just...
Well, that's why they're so grumpy.
That's why they're crabby.
Yeah.
That's why they raided stuff. They're like, well, they just wanted exercise, you know? I have been sitting on a boat. I got to do something. I guess I'll hit something with my axe.
All right.
And they don't want to go chop down more trees.
No, limited trees, I imagine.
Yeah, so they just go kill people. And that was another thing, too, is they needed to have a resource-efficient vehicle, right? You can't sink thousands of logs into a gigantic warship.
Yeah.
When you could make, a few really good trees into a long ship and then outfit it and you can go wherever. And the Vikings were not just raiders and destroyers. It was that they had
They were also lovers.
Yes, they were lovers. They were poets. They did have poetry. That's how most of their language is maintained, is through poetry. That's how they remembered their stories.
No writing, but poetry.
Yep, they had poetry. A very important person in Viking culture was the skald. A skald was what like the Irish would call a bard.
Okay.
So he would travel and he would tell stories. Usually a he. There were women skalds as well. And they would share either stories of the gods or their own history. And they would go from place to place. And really the payment was usually room and board. You live here.
It's a living.
Yep. And Vikings were big on you do what you're good at and you get that as your occupation. And they didn't really pay wages. They had some laborers. They also had slaves. It's a thing that not a lot of people talk about. The Vikings had slaves. They called them thralls. And thralls were considered non-people acquired through conquest. So that was a big part of their thing. That's free labor.
Were they of similar race, or they were not?
They were anybody they wanted them to be.
Okay.
So they were equal opportunity.
Well, that's nice
slavery.
at least.
That's better. Again, better than chattel slavery. It's not you look different than us. You're a slave. It could be the neighbors.
If you're gonna enslave people,
and sometimes
equal opportunity
that was a
about it.
punishment too. Like if you broke the law, your life could be considered forfeit, or you could go into thraldom to the family that you offended. Viking culture was big on vendetta. That was a huge thing. If you killed his cousin, he had the right to try to kill you, and that was considered legal and fair.
Okay.
But you had to be able to say, well, this guy killed my cousin.
Oh, okay.
These people saw that he killed my cousin.
Was it like an honor thing?
It was an honor thing that they would have blood feuds. And
Yeah.
those could get kingdom-wide.
Yeah.
Because it could escalate. Well, he killed my cousin. Well, that's my cousin too. Well, that's my brother, and I'm related to the king.
Yeah, I remember how the gangs worked in the 80s.
Yeah, that's right. When you had to have your razor. Right?
No.
The 1880s, you had your...
No, I was thinking
no,
1980s,
no,
1990s.
I'm just thinking how old you are.
You think I'm
140
years old? Okay.
You've aged very well.
Yes,
for
actually, I'll take it.
You're welcome.
I'll take it.
You're welcome.
Carry on.
I got nothing. Sorry. So anyway, the Vikings weren't called that. Nobody called them the Vikings.
Okay.
They were usually called the Danes.
The
But
Danes.
They came from Denmark for the most part. Denmark's thrust out as a peninsula right into the middle of multiple bodies of water. It has big, huge islands. So everything is...
Is Denmark on the European side, pointing up towards Scandinavia?
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of Michigan-shaped.
Okay.
Kind of Michigan-shaped. It's got, like, big cuts into it and, like, whole islands. But it was also divided up into little kingdoms. There was, like, Jotland, which is spelled Jutland. Jutland. And that was a very powerful area because and then Denmark did well for itself because it wasn't as cold as its northern neighbors.
Oh, sure.
So a lot more of it was farmable, or they had trees that grew everywhere that they could easily access, so they could make more stuff. But the Norse, as they were called, they were like a hardier people. They were just seen as hardier because you had to be to live that far north. It was just friggin' cold.
Yeah.
And those were the two big ones. Sweden also had Vikings, but not as many. And Finland was not a thing. That was its own thing.
Okay.
It was usually considered like part of Rus territory.
Oh, yeah.
But also, it did have Scandinavian peoples as well, because it's kind of this weird borderland that's its own thing.
It's hard to just draw a line on the map and say, all you people stay on this side.
Right.
All you people stay on that side.
Yep. And then as Finland evolves, like the Mongols lived there for a while, because they conquered all the way through Russia into Finland. So some people today are descendants of Mongols. Possibly even
Probably
Genghis Khan himself.
one guy.
Yep,
Yeah.
just one guy. Just Genghis is like, I'm sleeping with all the Finnish women. I want 7,000 children.
That's how he sounded, too.
That's an accurate Genghis.
Yeah.
This is how I talk. It's Patrick Warburton as Genghis Khan.
Genghis
Hey
Khan.
guys, my name's Genghis Khan. I'm gonna sleep with your girls. You stole my Jesus.
Well, better than John Wayne's
Oh
interpretation.
my gosh, let's not. Yeah, the less said about John Wayne, the better. I just read that he tried to physically assault the native woman who accepted Marlon Brando's
Oscar thing? Yeah.
He tried to rush the stage and beat her up. He had to be
You
held back.
just heard that? Was that
I had never
in connection?
heard about this.
I didn't,
Might have been in connection to
probably in
somebody
connection
else
to the latest.
slapping somebody at the Oscars recently, and they were like, "This is the first time this happened." Well, actually,
Someone actually
else
went there
did try to hurt
Interesting.
her. But that was the last time they could find somebody being violent at the Oscars,
Okay.
and he failed.
So,
But anyway,
we're saying the Oscars are very safe. So it's safe to go. Don't worry, it's safe
Typically.
to go back to the
it's
Oscars.
safe to go back to the Oscars. One guy slapping another guy does not mean. And
Moving on.
One
I don't want to talk about. I
One
was,
horrible racist guy trying to attack a woman, but being thwarted by security. Good job, security.
I was bored of this thing the second I saw
heard
it.
about it. The second I heard about it. I don't care.
All right, moving on.
Anyway,
Vikings.
So Vikings, Mongols, they are somehow interconnected. Because the Vikings, due to the craftsmanship of their ships,
Yes.
they could travel upriver as well as in the ocean.
Okay.
And that was not usually a thing.
Right. Yeah, the boats are too big.
Yeah, if you had a boat, it had to be a real deep draft, so you wouldn't go and sink and you die.
Yeah.
But boats at the time too, in the early Middle Ages, were considered fairly primitive, at least in this chunk of the world. This is not like there's Mediterranean ships like what the Greeks had, which is the trireme, which is basically a much bigger version of the longship.
Okay.
But those were warships made to ram into things. Viking ships are not made for combat like that. They're not made to ram into things. They're made to... They could work as a platform to shoot from, so you have archers, or you could board another ship, but you didn't ram into the other
They're
thing.
more for transport a lot of people.
Yes. They were big on amphibious warfare.
Okay.
Land the ship, bail from the ship, push the ship back in the water, sail away before anybody could get involved.
Right.
And they used these ships to go all over the place. So Europe is like a network of rivers, and lakes, and those all connect to different seas. So Vikings actually were able to travel from the top of Norway to Iceland, where they settled, to Greenland, where they settled, to North America, where they had a settlement as early as like 1040. Allegedly. They did, because they found stuff. We found weapons and timbers and gear that are from that
Leif
time.
Erikson?
Leif Erikson is supposedly settled
his
there
book. Okay.
in Vinland, is what they called it.
Finland.
Which is modern day, like, Newfoundland.
Oh, okay.
So, all the way from Newfoundland to Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Because they took the riverways and they got to, like, the Danube River, which leads into, like, Hungary, and they could find ways into, like, the Mediterranean through either rivers or going around it.
Feels real out of place to have a Viking in Saudi Arabia.
It is really... and it's fascinating, too, because, like, there was a book written about it. It was The 13th Warrior. It was a movie. Like, Antonio Banderas, he meets a bunch of Vikings. They go back to Viking lands and they fight. It's a ridiculous, over-the-top, kind of a silly movie. But as a book, I think it was it Michael Crichton? Somebody like that wrote this book, and I think it was called, like, Eaters of the Dead was the original one. Great title. But it was about how the Vikings were there, and they were, like, merchants, but they had to go on this quest, or to secure this guy's legacy, and this Arabic poet follows them around. For some reason, rather than finding an Arabic actor, they picked Antonio Banderas, who is Spanish, but it worked.
I'm not gonna question Hollywood casting.
I don't care.
John Wayne once played Genghis Khan.
Let's not go back to John Wayne. It's a subject I don't like.
Apparently,
I don't
we have
like
to look at the John Wayne.
We could do an episode on why Will doesn't like John Wayne. Yeah,
Right.
dig into that. But anyway, so they were all the way there. They could have been even further east, but for sure we know that they were in Saudi Arabia.
All right.
So that's a huge. They didn't conquer it all, and they didn't necessarily raid all the places they went. They were also merchants. They were very savvy merchants. A lot of the time it was, we stole this from England. We're gonna sell it in Constantinople.
Aren't we good salespeople?
Look at us. But a big part of this came from a need to find land. They needed farmland to feed their families.
Sure.
And the Viking people are very family oriented. Because these are the people that get you through the winter. These are the people that make your stuff, and their economy is based on barter and interacting with each other. They have social responsibilities to the clan, to their jarl, to their lord. And like farms were considered. That was like, if you were a farmer, you were very well respected because you made the food.
Sure.
So it wasn't like a lot of Europe where like farmers were like crappy peasants and they were treated like garbage. They were typically the best fed because they had enough food to feed themselves.
Yeah.
But then like they didn't have to go to war a lot of the time. The warriors would go to war, and the
So you do what you're good at.
farmers
so
would
then-
stay home and farm. Now farmers did also go to war, like they're Vikings.
Sure.
These are hardy folk. They want to go fight because that's a chance to get spoils, to get to get slaves, and glory. Glory is huge in Viking society.
Okay.
This is a massive thing because of their pagan faith. So the ideas that, and this is pushed in all the movies about the concept of Valhalla.
Yes.
So Valhalla is where the warriors go when they die. Not everybody dies a warrior, but the idea of Valhalla for them is if you die in battle, you are carried away to the halls of Valhalla. where
Rainbow
you get to
Bridge.
meet your ancestors. You're carried along the Bifrost to the Rainbow Bridge. Yes, and then you live with your ancestors, and then every day you get up and you fight in a massive battle. And if you die, whatever. But then that night you go to party and get drunk and hammered, and then you wake up and you do the same thing the next day. And you do this for eternity to practice for the final battle, Ragnarok.
Ragnarok.
And when Ragnarok shows up, you're the frontline warriors. You're the Einherjar.
You better be ready.
Warriors. And you're supposed to go in and fight with the gods to destroy all of the evil forces. Like
Okay.
Surtur, the flame giant, and Fenrir, the giant wolf that consumes the world, and Jormungandr, the worm.
Have you read the Neil Gaiman Norse mythology?
I've read American Gods. I haven't read his his mythology book yet.
Oh,
Because he just came out with that, didn't he? Or he came out with...
recently, I guess.
He came out with a mythology book that looked really cool, where it's like Arthurian legend, and there's a little old lady who's the main character.
Oh, that I've not.
That's a new one, but I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
That sounded fascinating.
If you listen, check it out. Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. It's just he just wrote it down in English.
Yep, he's fascinating. I
Those
think
Norse things.
'cause the first book that is considered like all of the Norse mythology thrown together is called the Pros Edda. The Edda is
Okay.
what they call that. And it was written down by Snorri Sturluson. Snorri. He was a dwarf. He was sleepy all the time. Snorri. Snorri Sturluson was... he was considered kind of the wise man of his time. He was a scholar, poet, writer in, I think, the 13th century.
Okay.
So this is when Norse countries or Nordic countries are starting to become Christianized. So I think he was a monk. The theory is he was probably a monk, or at least educated there.
A pagan monk.
No, he's a Christian.
Christian monk.
Because by then, the Christians had started taking over.
Oh, okay.
The Christian, almost as soon as the Vikings started murdering Christians, they started becoming Christians.
Oh, I wonder how that.
It's just a
connected.
cross-pollination of people and ideas.
Yeah.
And then there were forcible conversions.
Right.
Like there were nations where the kings just said, all right, we're all Christians now. And the pagans were like, we don't want to. Too bad. And of course, religion at the tip of a sword
Sure.
if you don't.
There you go. I also have to imagine when the king decides it, there's probably a fair chunk of the populace who Just didn't notice one way or another.
Didn't notice one way or the other, didn't care.
Right.
If it didn't affect them. And it was kind of nice for a lot of these warrior guys, because, like, wait, if I'm killing people, like, I don't have to die to go to happy heaven time?
Oh.
Like, in battle? I still get to go to happy heaven time? So all, like, the not warrior people were kind of like, this isn't a bad racket.
I'll take it.
We'll take it. So we don't have to get slaughtered. Because as Vikings got older, they got concerned.
Oh.
If you were a warrior and you got old, you lost your chance to go to battle. They didn't want to bring old people along.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the time. And you maybe, because if you die at sea, you don't die in battle, which means you don't go to Valhalla.
Oh, no.
You have to die in combat.
Where do you go if you don't go to Valhalla?
Hell.
Okay.
Yep. There is an afterlife that's not Valhalla, but it's not as nice.
Okay.
I
I assume that they touch on that because Loki's children either are from hell or create hell or
his daughter is Hel.
is hell. Yeah.
It's a very complex
Yeah.
family thing. And the movies, sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes they get it right. Like, Odin and Loki are brothers, not father and son. Thor and Loki are not brothers.
Okay.
That's his uncle.
Oh.
And Loki's also a fire god.
Oh.
He's a god who loves mischief and trickery, but he's technically a god of fire.
Okay.
And then he has weird children.
Yeah.
One of his children is Fenris, the wolf.
The wolf. Yeah.
One of them is Hela.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is a horse.
Yeah. Because he had sex with a horse.
He had sex with he just kind of got around.
Well, he was a horse at the time.
Yeah, so it's fair.
We're not here to talk about that, though, are we?
I'm not here to judge him. No, but just to understand Norse mythology is
Sure.
important.
Yeah.
In understanding, like, why this culture believed in hunting glory.
Yes.
So the most glorious battle you could find, like, that was a noble cause. Not slaughtering innocent people, like, that wasn't they did, but that wasn't a huge thing.
Sure.
It wasn't like they were driven to find battle.
Okay.
But also, if you're the guy who raided that place and brought back all this wealth, that's glorious as well. That makes you famous.
Okay.
Fame is huge.
But they're not, when they go out, they're not empire building. Mostly they're going and grabbing stuff
They
and
go
coming
and
back.
come home. Yep.
Okay.
And then they would build these massive trade centers back home, where they'd have all these stolen goods, or they'd bring back ideas a lot of the time.
Sure.
They'd bring back prisoners just to ask them questions, to learn about things. They'd also bring back slaves. They'd also bring back merchants just to trade with. Like, they'd meet people. Like, sometime you could go on the same expedition and you raid here and then land there as a merchant, and then land here and meet, like, a farmer and learn something about farming. And then you go other places. But eventually the Vikings did want more. They wanted to settle.
Right.
The idea of finding rich farmland was huge for them,
Yeah.
which is why you start seeing this massive migration into Britain, especially, is very common. Well, the Vikings found out that Britain was like, perfect land for them. It's an island. You
Real
can attack
nice.
it from anywhere.
Rainy and cloudy most of the time, but hey.
Yep, but the land is rich.
Okay.
And rainy and cloudy, way better than snowy and icy.
I guess.
So they're like, oh, this is great. We want
Yeah.
this. They've got farms. They have farming techniques the Vikings haven't even seen. But the Vikings have ships that nobody's seen. And the English would build big coastal defenses because they're like, we're an island, we need to defend our coast.
Yeah.
And the Vikings would just sail past it right up the river. And they're like, wait!
No.
How do we get to them? They have boats. Don't we have boats? Not that go in the
Nope.
river. We have a canoe.
What were we thinking?
This is a terrible idea. Well, so the Vikings are finding, like, their first raids, actually, first reported raid was 789 in Portland, not Washington.
That does seem like a long
It's a long
way to go.
long trip.
Or maybe the Portland, Maine. That's not as long.
It's also too long.
Yeah, I mean.
This was in England, Portland, England. Their most famous raid was an abbey called Lindisfarne, and that was in 783.
I just realized the name Portland probably comes from it being a port.
It was a port, yes. And it was land.
The word Portland has become so mushed in my head that it just means I forgot that it actually
Coffee
means.
place. Coffee tech place.
I just forgot it means it's a port.
It's a port. It's
Okay.
a land which has a port. Yes.
Right.
And it's like half of England is a port. I feel
Yeah.
because their entire
Well,
border
there's
is
that
just
too,
it's a port. It's just, we got one everywhere except Dover because it's a giant freaking cliff. And you can't launch a ship there. I mean, could. It's just a long
It's hard to
way down.
dock on the way back.
Yeah. And we crashed. This is not good. And that was like the Vikings the first time they like wrote. Well, the Vikings didn't write about, but they would talk about the cliffs of Dover. That was
Oh,
like
yeah.
a holy crap! Is that
Right.
like a sheet of ice? Oh no, that's cool. Yeah. Look at this. It's a kind of neat place. Giant white wall of death. Challenge accepted. And so they were raiders. But the reason why they largely went to England was because France was a really tough nut to crack.
Oh.
At this time, France has a particular king named Charlemagne,
Charlemagne.
who is, at the time, the baddest dude in Europe. He has rebuilt armies, he's constructed roads. Well, the Vikings show up in 799, and he says, this is a problem, and I foresee it being an issue. And he starts having, he's hearing about the raids in England, and the Vikings loved targeting monasteries, which is why they have a particularly nasty reputation.
Okay.
Because they were usually not super well defended.
Yep.
They were isolated, and they had a ton of money. Because monasteries were sites for trade. All the peasants in the surrounding area, all the communities, they would have trading events there. They would have big market days. And then also the church collect alms for the poor, but also the more corrupt ones would just collect alms for the people, for themselves, for the priests.
For the pockets.
And you know, it's interesting because like the Vikings, they didn't care about like destroying like the crosses or they're like they just put all this fancy stuff in a big stone house and said, "Come on down." Like they think this is great, but they would just grab anything of, especially metal, of value. So they'd like, if they saw like brass hinges on a door, they'd rip the door off and take the hinges. These are like the guys who strip buildings for the copper pipe.
Yeah,
Like,
okay.
They're like, oh yeah, this is useful. Yeah, we're going to take it and we'll bring it back.
My door.
And then they'd melt that down, and it would be like trinkets for the family. So I killed 6 priests, and I killed 6 priests, and all I got was this stupid door hinge. Seems
Oh,
like a waste of time.
Good one, Bjorn. Tell us another.
And then I made it into a little hammer to be like Thor's hammer, and now I have respected the gods. Aren't I a good Viking?
Oh, the gods.
Yeah, the gods.
So you said the goats.
Well, the gods had goats.
I got respect of the goats.
Yes, Thor had 2 goats.
He did.
He had 2 goats, pulled them on a chariot.
Snarla and
And
Snarla.
Yep.
Snarla.
Nerfla and Durfla.
Actually, I think I'm close.
I think one was like Snarly or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. I have a little tiny Yule goat. That's what the Yule
Oh
goat
yeah,
represents.
we've discussed
we
the
talked
goats
about this.
before. All right.
So that's the Vikings. They're
Yes, Vikings.
They are, and like I said, the people largely called them the Danes. They called them Northmen, and they looked different. You know, this is a culturally different people. So, contrary to popular belief, they didn't have horned helmets. That is not a thing. They did
That
not
is-
ever put horns in their helmets.
It is a good aesthetic, though.
It's a great aesthetic, but it's pointless, and it's like joked about.
Pointless.
They do a good job. Shut up. But there was a culture, and I think it was a precursor to the Vikings, where they found a helmet that did have like horn protrusions, but they were made out of like bronze.
Oh.
And that was like one time, and it was, I think, like a chieftain trying to look cool. He's like, look at my horny helmet.
Yeah, Where did do you suppose the
The horn thing came from?
Yeah.
They probably found something like that and thought, everybody did this.
Oh,
But that's
okay.
like an 18th or 19th century thing. None of the old works about the Vikings talk about this.
Okay.
So this is like one of those, this is what the T-Rex looks like. Or
Yeah.
they found something, like an artifact, and thought, this must be what everybody
sure.
did.
Yeah, okay.
And they would find like holes in certain places. Well, a lot of that was like maybe holes for the ears so they could hear what was going on in battle.
Yeah.
I mean, sucks if an arrow goes through, but the chance of that, super small. And it's more important to hear all the time.
Except for Sven, who keeps turning his head to the side. Huh? What'd you
What'd they say?
What's it? Arrow.
I can't hear them. It's not happening. But they did have very interesting like helmets. Like they were like steel caps, and then they had these cool like eye rings
Oh.
to protect their face.
Okay.
But you typically, a lot of them wore beards, so
protect
that was
the
real
face.
hard to put. You know, a
Oh,
helmet
sure,
to
yeah.
cover the beard, because then you got your beard sticking out
Yeah.
through your eye hole. It just didn't work. But movies are really bad about portraying what the Vikings wore and armed themselves with.
Okay.
They always make them wear leather and furs. And I just knock my necklace around the back of my head. I don't know
Sorry. You'll be
why.
okay.
But Vikings didn't typically do that. They didn't have a lot of livestock to be making everything out of leather.
Oh.
And there was no purpose really in wearing fur on the outside. You wore it on the inside
Yeah.
to keep you warm.
Yeah.
So while they might have worn that for coats, or they would wear leather as, buckles and straps, their primary equipment was, if they were fresh off the boat, they might not wear any armor. Not shirtless, but they wear like linen clothing, and maybe you layer that. But if you fell in the water and you're in mail armor, you're going to sink like a freaking rock.
Yeah.
So that's a 40-pound shirt. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Also, scarcity of metal meant that the swords were not the common weapon. The spear was the most common weapon.
Okay.
If you can kill somebody from farther away,
Sure.
and then they had big shields.
Yep.
So you don't need as much armor if you're good with the shield. So you want to be comfortable. You want to move quick. And then you have a steel helmet to protect your skull. Because shield, head, spear,
Knees and toes.
knees and toes. Yep.
Got it.
And they had these big round shields, and they would get into what was called a shield wall formation, which was very common back then.
Sure.
That was a defensive technique. In the movies, they always make them like go shield wall and they march forward. They didn't do that. It's slow as heck. Like there's no point in it. But if arrows start flying, then you shield wall and you protect yourselves. It was just a smart way of doing things.
Absolutely.
And it became more common in different cultures as the Vikings start showing up. So like when we talked about William the Conqueror, and he was fighting against like the Housecarls, the soldiers of the house. They were based off of Viking warriors.
Oh.
That was their style.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were descendants of Vikings. Because England by that time, very populated. The Saxons are a Norse people, and the Angles are not original. They're like Germans. And then they lived in Britain, and then the Danes showed up, and they all started intermingling. So like this idea of English is like a mix of German people,
Oh yeah.
Scandinavians, and French folk. It's just a weird little hotspot. The only people who are actually like the original people who lived there are Welsh.
Oh.
It's
no
very-
one understands what they're saying.
And no one knows what's going on. They're the least like English of all of them. Like, what is that? How many syllables? I don't know what's going on. But in France, meanwhile, the Vikings are like, okay, so we know France is rich. It is super rich. It has
You can
great.
smell it.
It's very. The land is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's great for making wine and all sorts of crops. They have livestock in abundance. They have a great sense of like growing merchant class. It's very, very wealthy.
Yeah.
But their first raid made Charlemagne go, So King Charles starts building fortifications along the entire northern front. All along the coast. He's got towers. He has a whole system of defenses. He has big chains that can be strung up across the river to block boats coming through. And he's like,
Aha,
good.
figured it out. Good.
He's got it. He's got plans. The problem is he's one guy and his kids were not him.
Oh no.
His son was Louis the Pious, which means he's
Louis.
about as good of a warrior
Oh. Yeah.
as your cat, who
Sure.
is fierce when needs to be, but tends to get his butt
But really
kicked.
not good. Yes.
Not really good at it. He's more focused on the church. So he
Yes.
weakens the power of the king and his kingdom to make the church better. But he wasn't very good at maintaining defenses. Well, eventually Louis dies, and he stupidly, instead of having the empire go to one of his sons, he splits it amongst like 4 of them. So this, of course, causes a problem.
Yes.
There's Louis the German. Guess which part of the country he got?
England.
Yes. And then he's got like 3 other sons. One of them is Charles, later called Charles the Bald. Now, none of the pictures showing Charles the Bald have him without hair. Bald could mean a couple of things.
Okay.
Bald is also a term for like bald face, like bold,
Okay.
like right in your face. Bald could also mean that he didn't have a crown when he was first
Oh, sure.
like coming up. His brothers all had land, but he didn't get any.
Okay.
So he's the bald. He's like bereft of title, bereft of land, bereft of a crown. That's where your hair is. So you're bald. Ha ha.
All right. So he might not be bald.
So he
Stop
might
being
not
so
be bald.
childish, people.
Not being childish.
Listening.
But then they just kind of start calling him Charles the Bald. He was not the most popular guy. I think he was the youngest of his brothers. But he ended up inheriting France, or at least a big chunk of Western
Hey,
France.
good job, Charles.
He was at constant odds with his brothers and his cousins and all of these other nobles. They didn't want him to be the king, and it was probable that he was like, I am the heir to Charlemagne, like those before me, and just like you guys, but I'm better at it, you know. And so there's a lot of infighting. Unfortunately for him, though, he's so focused on all this other stuff that he's not able to really deal with the Viking threat. he thinks the fortifications have held for so long, this won't be a serious issue. Except the Vikings start getting better about it.
Oh no.
As they raid more, they get more experience.
Sure.
They get more money. When they get more money, they can develop new techniques for their equipment. So like we we're talking about how most of them might not even wear a lot of armor. Well, now the Vikings are showing up with mail armor and great axes. Or the Viking sword is a very famous style to it. There we go. It's about that, the blade's like that long.
Okay.
And it's like that thick or that wide with what's called a fuller down the middle. It's a groove. Everyone calls it a blood groove, but that's not what it's for. It's to make the blade lightened and more hardened.
Okay.
So you pound the crap out of it. What they would do to make it is they'd take basically 3 lengths of rebar and coil them around each other and hammer this out while heating it, as opposed to starting it out with one block. And they'd use kind of crappy iron to do it, but they had such a great forging process that you can still find swords, and some of them are functional, which is wild. Like from the 8th or from the 9th century.
Yeah.
Like they have these. Now the majority of them are not but they'll pull them out of a tomb, and they're rusty, but they're full length. I mean, if you hit it on something, it's going to break. But the workmanship and the detail is incredible. And these took a long time to make. They put a lot of effort into it. It was craftsmanship, not trying to produce as much as humanly possible. So you've got these really expert smiths who are working in detail. And then the fancier the more important you were, the fancier your kit. So you have etchings on your helmet and on your weapons. You have scroll work and details. You have, jewelry. Like these guys you carried your wealth on you a lot of the time. Because if you were sailing in your ship and you got shipwrecked, coins are stupid. But like you're in foreign land, you could take off a bracelet and that's gold. Now you have money. You
versus
can trade.
having to have a little pouch of things.
Yeah.
And this is before debit cards.
This is before debit cards. And the Vikings didn't use coins.
Oh,
They didn't have a minted
further.
They took other people's coins because they knew that had value. Like gold's gold. Like it's got value. But they didn't necessarily mint coins to their leaders. So you have this culture that's building up on this. They want more wealth. They want more stuff. They're trying to expand and to grow. They're trying to learn, and they're constantly developing and traveling. Some of them are able to extort lands from the French. So there's a theory that Charles, to try to keep people from really bothering him, he's like, you Vikings just go live there, and you can maybe work as my soldiers.
Enjoy.
This whole mindset gives rise to a man who is considered possibly mythical, but his sons are real, and they all claim that their father is this guy. His name is Ragnar Lodbrok, and Ragnar is the most famous Viking in history. He's had television shows made for him. He's had films made for him. One of the most famous things about him, unfortunately for him, is his death, which was a pretty horrific and intense thing. We don't have to go into. Well, we can. But we know for sure he was a guy because there was a king named Aella, who's a king of Northumbria in England. He captured Ragnar, threw him in a pit of snakes. And just had the snakes eat him, and he allegedly said, "My sons will avenge me." And not long after that, an army called the Great Heathen Army showed up, and it was led by his very famous sons, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Ivar the Boneless. Those were the names of his kit, and they were horrifying.
Yeah.
Like, Bjorn Ironside was supposedly invincible. Sigurd Snake in the Eye was, like, legendarily, like, either there was something wrong with his eye, or, like, a snake could be a symbol of wisdom and power, or greed, even. And then Ivar the Boneless, nobody knows exactly why. There's jokes that maybe he had man issues.
No.
He was boneless. There were theories that maybe he was crippled. And then also boneless, as in you could hit him as hard as you could and you couldn't break his bones. So he must not have bones. So nobody's really sure what his deal was. But he's one of the leaders of this great heathen army that swept into England and just wiped the floor and conquered almost all of it.
Out of revenge for
Ragnar's death.
Throwing Ragnar into the snake pit.
Yes. So don't kill famous people's dad.
Well, that's
like
good
if
advice.
they're famous for warriors.
That's good advice.
a really bad
anytime,
idea.
Man.
If you're gonna kill the famous warrior, make sure he doesn't have famous warrior sons.
Sure.
It's a really bad idea. But so Ragnar is this mythical guy because these dudes are all real. Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, these are real. They are part of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is our best live source information of the time. It's very biased because it's written by the Anglo-Saxon people who
Yep.
were beaten up by the Vikings. So they're not going to be nice about these guys.
Oh, okay.
And it's largely written by monks who are, as we just said, largely victimized by these guys. And Alfred the Great was a big believer in spreading this information, talking like education, writing, keeping records, and he was a great English king who united a big chunk of England. So we know this is how we kind of know who Ragnar is based on his sons, and then we mix it with he's part of several sagas, and sagas are these huge stories that are kind of like the Greek epics. They're massive tales that are kind of like Arthurian legend, where it's based on a real guy, but some of the stuff is mixed together.
Sure.
We don't know exactly about all the facts. So Logbrook, his last name, title thing, literally means hairy breeches, hairy pants.
Hairy pants.
Hairy pants. And apparently why he had these hairy pants was to protect him from this serpent that had like acidic breath. And the hair in the pants protected him from the poison reaching his body and leaking into him.
Good story.
It's an interesting story. Nobody's really sure about the veracity of it, or if or
Why
whatever.
else would they wear hairy pants?
Why else would he wear hairy pants? But there's no record of this guy actually like charging into battle wearing hairy pants.
I like how they feel.
But it's like inverted chaps. It's leather on the outside, no hair on the outside. It's weird.
For those of you watching, do not look up inverted chaps.
I feel like that's just a dangerous Google search.
Yep.
Don't look up chaps. I feel like that's a dangerous Google
Unless you're
search.
buying chaps.
Unless you're buying chaps. But that might also be a dangerous Google. Like coffee could be a dangerous Google
Sure,
search.
I guess,
You don't
yeah.
know. People are weird. Anyway, so this Ragnar guy is also maybe tied to a local Viking who had raided.
Mm-hmm.
And Charles the Bald was sick of his crap. And he's like, if I give you a farm, will you leave me alone? And he did.
Okay.
So
Phew.
we know for a fact that there was a man named, they called him Regan Harris.
Regan Harris.
Regan Harris, which translated roughly is Ragnar.
Oh, okay.
So there is a Ragnar at this time. We're not sure if he's the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok, because after this event, he kind of fades out of history for a moment. And we don't know who his kids were, but we can assume because of when this happens and when the Great Heathen Army shows up, that his kids would be of age, that Ivar and Bjorn Ironside and all these guys, they could be this Ragnar's kids.
Okay.
So we have to do some, just to be clear and honest about all this, we can't say, yes, Ragnar Lodbrok, the legendary Viking hero, in fact attacked Paris and he was the father of all these great men and blah, 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 blah. So we're just laying out all of the facts.
Right.
And it's largely, again, the Vikings didn't take notes. So this is the French taking notes.
I see.
And it's also, again...
And we will spell it how we want to spell it.
Spell it how we want. Is Ragnar Harris. I said Ragnar? Yeah, Ragnar Harris. Yeah, we heard this. Is how,
It's a nice French-German
That
accent
was a,
there.
yeah. Well, they're Frankish. They're French-Germans. They're Furmans.
Perfect.
It was also totally accidental. So
Yes, I know.
So this Ragnar, though, Regan Harris shows up with 120 ships, sails down the river, and he's like, we are coming for you. And 120 ships holds about 5,000 men.
Wow.
And these are warriors. These are not farmers. I mean, maybe they're farmers part-time,
Sure, yeah.
but these are, every single person on their ship is a fighter. And there is a lot of legend about shield maidens, women who could fight.
Okay.
The Vikings would have allowed women to fight. If you could fight, you could fight. They didn't care.
Well,
Women were,
equality.
yeah, and women in Viking society were treated with a great deal of respect because they were the keepers of the house. That was sacred. They also had to protect the house. So they were trained to be like what would be called a hearth guard. They protected the homestead when the men would go out and conquer. The reason a lot of the times you didn't want women going on these long sea voyages, if they got pregnant,
Oh, sure.
they were at risk.
Yeah.
And then they're dead. And child, you still can lose a child in like 1 in
Sure.
100, I think, mortality rate today. This is no hospitals
Yeah.
on a ship
On a boat.
in the middle of the ocean.
It's hard to sleep on in the
Yeah,
first place.
there's no beds. There's no place. You just kind of have to sit up and
Yeah, I can't imagine
have a kid.
being a woman and being like,
Yeah. So
I want to go on that boat.
right. So like a lot of the times the Vikings they would have a very, hi honey, I'm gonna leave now, and when I get home, there's probably gonna be a baby. You know, you have this lovely send off because they'd feast. They have a
Sure.
massive feast before they went off on a raid. You'd say goodbye to your loved ones. That usually means intimacy.
Yep.
You're gone for maybe a year. You come back,
Hey,
baby,
look at that.
new little farmer.
It's like when
new
you're at
little
a
Viking.
It's like when you're at a restaurant and you go to the bathroom, you come back and your dinner's there.
It's a nice feeling.
It's kind of like that.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully you come back with an arm full of treasure.
Sure, yeah.
And then you're like, look, now we can have another
Hey,
kid.
all right.
This raid was so successful, I'm going back next
How
year.
about we celebrate, honey?
And for years, the Viking people would raid, but they would just kind of raid locally. So they'd like fight each other.
And then someone said, "Hey,
And some of the
what if
they
we go
finally said,
across
"What if
the-"
we go?" They started figuring out new ways of traveling.
Yeah.
They started figuring out how to travel by guiding themselves with the sun rather than going along the coast. So then they could go further.
Yeah.
They made these better ships so they could go further and wider. And when they started coming into the coastlines of France, this caused a huge uproar.
Oh,
This
yeah.
was a big problem because
imagine.
they thought Charlemagne's defenses will protect us, no problem.
No problem."
Well, if you're not manning the defenses,
Oh no,
you're not having enough guys there.
we
You're not...
can't just pay lip service to our history.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they'll be scared because of Charlemagne.
Right.
You know he's been dead for 20 years. I think they'll have found out.
Aren't they afraid of him still?
No.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Because he was fearsome. Like
Sure,
the Vikings, like they did not do well against him. He was a fierce warrior king who knew how to properly, send somebody to deal with this
Yeah.
problem.
But now
was
he
really
gone.
good at it, but now he gone. And then Louis the Pious was focused on praying mostly.
Yeah.
And he was kind of an ineffective king. So poor Charles the Bald inherits basically war and
Is that why they let him have France? Like, hey, you can
Probably,
have
yeah,
France.
probably, they might have. Like, yeah, you can have
Hope
it.
you don't screw it up, Charles
Yeah,
the Bald.
exactly. It feels like he was set up for failure.
Would you call me?
Exactly. I have hair. Yeah, but let's talk about your kingdom. Shut up.
Oh, dang, Charles.
You don't
the Bald.
insult my kingdom and my hair. I will kill you. With what army? He wears a
Oh,
good
Charles.
purpose. And that was a problem for him too. Is he was not popular as a result of all of this stuff. So he could never get an army together.
Oh,
he
man.
really struggled with that through his whole career. Eventually, he becomes an emperor. He inherits his grandfather's title of emperor.
Okay.
But like his brother Louis the German, disagrees. He never bends the knee.
Oh.
Then he dies, and Charles is like, "Well, I'm gonna go take his lands." He gets his ass kicked, goes back to France, kind of in shame and defeat.
Oh, Charles the Bald.
Because
He's like Charlie Brown.
Yeah, every time he lines up that football, just
Oh.
poof.
Poor Charlie.
Poor Charlie.
Charlie the Bald.
Charlie the Bald.
Did he have just one little hair
I
here?
feel like he just had like a curl.
Okay.
Just-
His little
The
straight-
pictures are all full heads of hair and stuff, but I'm just, that's what he's got now, is this little curl. He's better than his son. His son was Charles the Fat,
Oh no!
and he was awful.
Boy.
We'll talk a little about him because that's part of the legacy of this.
A choice between being fat or bald. And currently, I'm choosing both. But I would like to.
He was also considered like a tyrant and kind of a gross, not like fat because he did well. It was like excess, like
Oh, yeah.
gouty fat, like. And in the Middle Ages, how do you get gout?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, wasn't fat a good thing at some point
it
in
was
the middle,
considered,
or at least a sign of rich?
sign that if you were wealthy enough to get fat,
Yeah.
you had some money.
Then when the Rubenesque paintings were a thing.
Yeah, where it's.
Oh, and you don't know much about art, do you?
No, I don't. I'm not you're the art guy.
I'll start an art history.
We could do an art history day where we invert this.
Ooh,
We invert this week in history, art edition.
sounds like a lot of work for me. All right, moving on.
Just I won't even ask for sources. I'll just nod and smile. Yes,
Oh,
yes,
great.
yes. Toulouse-Lautrec was short. I know this.
Oh,
There you go.
make a note of that.
I know these things. So anyway,
All right.
moving right along.
Yeah,
Charles
we're
the
gonna get to the sacking of Paris.
Yeah, so Charles the Bald sees the Vikings coming.
Here they
He's
come.
very concerned about
Yes,
this.
he is.
And he starts, he's trying to build an army, and he's also surrounded by all these people. He's kind of struggling.
Yeah.
At the time, Paris is not the capital. That is not the seat of power.
Okay.
It is a very important trade center because Paris itself largely is in an island in the middle of the Seine River.
Yeah. What is the seat of power?
It was,
Or is France not really a thing
kind of
yet?
bounced around.
Okay.
I think it was. Let's check because it was wherever. I don't think it was Amiens. Rouen is really important. Rouen, which is north of there. I probably should have looked this up.
Well, either way, but France though is still a thing, and
France,
so
yeah,
and
so
Paris,
it's
I assume, was still a thing of a
Yes,
city.
This is. Oh, my pages are all stuck together. Spilling coffee. Gross. Let's see. Nope. Got nothing.
Was that where in the world's Carmen San Diego?
Maybe. Do 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 do
No,
do.
that's different.
That's the theme song from the show.
Yeah.
Anyway, it wasn't Amiens. It was like Artra or something. I can't remember.
If you know and you're watching what the
Put it
capital of France was in the 840-ish AD,
Yep.
let us know in the comments below.
There were largely big palaces. So, like, he had a royal palace near Paris, which nowadays is in Paris because Paris is so much bigger.
Sure, yeah.
They
brilliant.
also had a very important abbey nearby. It was the Royal Abbey of Saint Denis and Saint Denis, Saint Denis. And this was considered like super duper important for their people. This was a site of holy relics, and it's north of Paris, directly in the path of the Vikings as
Oh,
they're sailing south. So you're Charles the Bald. You're sitting there trying to handle these problems with your family, and somebody says, so there's 120 longships sailing towards Paris, and they just sacked Rouen. They ruined Rouen. Took all this money,
Sure.
but they're not done. That's not enough treasure for them. They're heading this way.
Were you? I'm sorry. Were you waiting to tell that ruin joke?
No, I
Okay.
just did it before you could.
I didn't know. It seemed like you were a little
Wait,
proud of
they
it.
ruined Rouen. No, I would have just said they ruined Rouen. It's like saying, is Nice nice?
You just seemed a little proud of it.
I was a little proud
I just
of
want to make sure that you got the
I
due.
laid awake all night last night, just like I can't wait till.
That's what it felt like to me. It felt like you had it, and then nothing.
Nope, not
That's
even
fine.
not even a
So I only accept
whisper of a joke.
jokes on the spur of the moment,
Okay.
not thought out ones.
Nope, that I literally thought it up just as I was saying
Okay.
about to say. I was like, oh, they ruined Rouen.
There you
Aha, I did.
Well, then worth it.
Thank you. Yes. So they ruined it.
Yep.
They sacked it.
Yep.
They took what they wanted, and then they continued south. They got a
Yeah,
lot of
that's-
room in those ships.
That's how they do it.
So Saint Denis is this very important church, and Charles is like, I cannot let them take it.
Yeah.
So he rallies an
Look
army
bad.
to go out and deal with this. Unwisely, he splits it in half, one on each side of the river.
Oh.
The Vikings do not split their forces and target the smaller half
Oop.
and crush it.
Yep.
They completely annihilate a division of the army, is that how it's described. So it's not sure if it was the whole army got annihilated or they just crushed this one part and the rest of the army retreated. They weren't able to take the temple itself or the church itself. They didn't take the abbey itself. So it's I assume that the larger portion of the army was there. And then they had this smaller portion of the army in case the Vikings tried to land on both sides and they could fight
Sure.
them off.
Okay.
So they crushed this smaller thing, and Ragnar, being a big believer, not just in other things, he's a very devout pagan. The most important offering to the gods was by hanging. So the legend is that Odin, their chief god,
Oh yeah, got wisdom from hanging from a tree.
got wisdom from hanging on a tree for 9 days.
Yeah.
This predates Christianity, by the way.
Yeah.
So he's crucified on a tree.
Yeah. There's probably some metaphor in that.
There's
by the way.
it's interesting that like that happens in Norse mythology. It happens in Christian mythology. It happens in so many different cultures across the globe that somebody is hanged for knowledge. They're put on a tree. They're nailed to a chunk of wood, and then there's always a resurrection.
Yeah.
So even in Egyptian mythology, Osiris dies and comes back, and is this.
I'm
savior.
wondering. I'm just postulating here if it's a matter of like self-sacrifice, but then connection to nature
It
because
is.
of the tree. You're like connected to the.
So the thinking behind it is that Odin sacrifices himself for knowledge. He does this because knowledge is never free.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes sacrifice.
Yeah.
And then a lot of their myths have to do with like Balder, the god of light, dies, but he or his son comes into being the god of light. So that's the death of summer, passing into the
Sure.
fall, and the winter is the dark time of Ragnarok when the wolves howl and the ice is thick.
Sounds like
And
the
then-
pagans kind of maybe got it right.
Yeah, they kind of did. Like, because it originally was just to explain how the heck everything works.
Yeah. A little more natural.
And that's why they
more-
started falling out of paganism, because they started to just kind of say, well, yeah, we don't frickin' know, so we're just explaining this. Meh. The closest a lot of them were just kind of lip service
Yeah.
pagans. But the warrior class was big into it. Like, they were the biggest into the rituals. They were very much nope, I'm going to die with an axe in my hand, or I'm not.
Well, I
gonna be
imagine if
happy.
also if you're in that line of work, that superstition and habits, like, oh, well, why are we following him? Well, he's still alive.
Yeah.
Have you seen the crap we've been doing?
Yep.
He's alive.
And he's
Well,
alive, and he's got all his fingers.
Whatever he's been thinking and doing, we should do
Must
that.
be good. Must be good. And it's a lot of, like, they start getting, like, warrior brotherhoods and like religious fanaticism. You can get a lot out of somebody if they're a religious fanatic. I mean, we just talked about the Knights Templar.
Yeah.
They were one of the most elite fighting forces of their time, and it was because they largely were like, yeah, if we die for God, so that's fine. Well, suddenly you have a fearless band of death dudes riding around.
Really,
and the Vikings
though,
did that
and I
too.
feel like we've derailed from whatever you were talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. But it feels like people have been using the fear and unknown of death as a way to control people in general. You don't know what's going to happen when you die.
Yep.
Well then, here, we'll give you some reason. Tell you what, and what if we go run out and into a dangerous situation and try to get yourself killed? Well, that makes death a lot more potentially to happen to me. Well, then you should probably have our religion and follow our religion.
Think about if you're a lord at the time and you're trying to get an army together
Yeah.
for your gain. You say, well, I want to go and kill this guy and take his stuff. Well, why should we go with you? Because I want it.
Bad pitch.
Or you will achieve eternal glory and go to Valhalla if you die. And if you don't die, you get wealth here. And then when you do die later, you'll have earned glory. So it's even better. So you'll be rich here and rich afterwards. That's a much better deal. And it's kind of like when the Romans shifted into Christianity, the emperor at the time used Christianity to kind of like unite his forces.
This show has just made me more upset about religion.
Isn't it
in
just
general.
wonderful? Isn't it just wonderful? This is the study of history should undermine a lot of people's, or at least
Question your faith.
question faith.
All right.
Faith's
Anyway,
fine.
are we
Religion,
getting?
though.
We're close to Paris.
So we're in Paris.
We're in Paris.
We're in Paris.
Oh, crap, they got here. Well, we were talking about religion.
We were talking, and the Vikings sailed right past.
Oh.
So again, the importance of why we're talking about Odin and the hanging is Ragnar to cause sheer terror with the Christians.
Hang on, tree.
Yep. So he's right there.
There he is.
That's where Odin is.
I can't forget.
This sucks so much. 9 days I gotta do this. This is stupid. To terrify the Christian defenders, he has 111 people hanged on trees on an island in the middle of the river, so everybody can see it.
Like prisoners, the people they caught.
Yep. Of the soldiers that he captured in that battle, he has 111 of them hanged.
That is a good visual.
Yeah. Also divisible by 9. I think. Right.
101.
111 might be divisible by no. Close. So close. That would have been great.
Stupid Viking.
Stupid Viking.
All right.
Not divisible by 9. But 9 is like a sacred number.
Yeah. All right.
I was thinking 3.
Sure.
I thought, because it's divisible by 3. Is it divisible by 9? Now I look like I don't know math. And I don't. So this is history, not math. Anyway.
Go on.
It's because I lost my beard. It was the source of my
source of your
knowledge.
power? Wow, yeah.
It's the source of my knowledge in math. So that's gone now. Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Anywho, so the Vikings have sailed to Paris. They've caused this terror. They use that to their advantage because now most of the army, too, is not inside of Paris. And they launch this massive assault on the northern part of the city. They use ladders from their ships. They scale the walls, which aren't like the images that you see of like Paris. There's always these giant stone walls and massive towers. They didn't have that. It was a trade center, so it would be very well defended. But we're not talking about 100-foot high walls. This isn't Rome.
Not a fortress per se,
It's
but
not. Yes, I mean it's stout. It's going to handle some stuff, but it's not impregnable.
Right.
And also, you got 5,000 very motivated warriors who just won a battle, so they're supercharged up.
Whee!
They breach the wall. It doesn't take a lot. There's not a huge amount of description about it that they are able to get through. So Charles's army is probably still outside the city and trying to rush to get there. Right? The boat, because the Vikings are like, yeah, we fought an army, and now we're back on our boats. And they're like, yeah, but they're sailing away. This is back to the city. And they're kind of like, do we have to?
So they're running after a boat.
Yep, they're chasing a boat heading downstream.
Yeah, on a boat.
They're just like, doop, 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 doop. we're here now. Let's go into the city.
Yep. Okay. Now
So,
time for the second.
It wasn't like a starvation siege type thing. They wanted loot. They wanted it now. So they assault it really fast. They scale the walls. They probably tore down a chunk of it. And they pour into the city and they just start looting like crazy. Charles is eventually able to get back to the city. Exactly. Fortunately for Charles, and unfortunately for the Vikings, war's dirty.
Oh.
And it's very easy to get sick
Oh.
under these conditions of you're burning stuff and killing people and there's corpses everywhere. So the plague starts to take hold
Oh no,
in
not the
Ragnar's
plague.
army. And these warriors wind up just kind of sitting around and being sick because they've got the plague now.
I
Well,
got the plague. I can't come into work killing
they're
people.
still kind of looting, you know. I'm just picturing a bunch of like 6 Vikings like, "Bleh." Ooh, there's a cup.
Oh, my head.
Like, I found this really cool brass. Bleh. Still worth it.
Gross.
You know,
Gross.
Gross. They're doing this. It's nasty. The legend is that because they were going to defile the abbey at Saint Denis, the saint protected the Vikings and spread
sure.
this plague.
Okay.
There's also this story that a French prisoner said, you know, you've been making offerings to the gods to end this plague. Maybe you should fast, and that will break the plague. What probably could have happened is the water was bad from all this murder and destruction,
Yeah.
and they were drinking it, and they probably got sick. And if they did fast, that would have helped because then they wouldn't be drinking tainted water.
Oh, sure.
Whatever happened though, the Vikings were like unable to fully take the city, but they looted the crap out of it. So they start like there's a central fortress that they can't crack,
Okay.
but there's all the homes and stuff, and they just
Take the stuff.
start going around taking things, but they won't leave. So
No,
Charles,
why would you?
so Charles is kind of stuck. His army isn't going to be able to beat the Vikings because if they're trapped, they'll fight like madmen.
Yep.
And they're still just taking stuff. So he's got 5,000, well, probably half that now, but still thousands of angry squatters
Squatters. Yep.
just lounging around in his city, and they're stinking the place up with plague.
Yeah.
Well, and then they start to recover too. So
Sure.
then that's bad.
Now
That's
we're feeling
really
good.
now it's really bad because he's like, oh no, we thought the plague would kill them all. They're getting better.
I'm feeling motivated now too.
I need them to leave. Also, he's still got problems with his brother, with the rebellious lords, and now he looks like an idiot because he's got Vikings in his city that he's in, and they almost took this royal abbey.
You got to do something, Baldy.
He has a ton of money.
Hey.
He
Money solves everything.
He kind of does what starts to be a trend. Take this money and go away.
Okay.
And the Vikings are like, why didn't we start with
We
this?
coulda-
Like, this is
Sat around with the plague for a year.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've been sick. I mean, killing people is great, but dying from the plague, like dying in battle, fine,
Sure.
like, that happens. But Sven puked himself to death, and
Poor
Bjorn pooped himself to death.
We
So,
only know those two names.
Sven and Bjorn, and Snorri.
Hurry up, Will.
All right. So Charles sends out guys to talk about this, and they settle on an amount. It's 7,000 livres, set in gold and silver. That translates to 5,670 pounds of gold and silver. That's more than a car. That's like
So how are they going to
That's
get
like
that
2.5
back? How are they
tons.
going to take that money? Where are
they
they
put it
going?
in their ships.
Each of them get 7,000.
Well, total.
Oh, okay.
So they get like almost 3 American tons of loot.
So they're like, this boat is just for gold.
Yeah, well, they spread it around. What they probably did is everybody goes and grabs an armful, and then they divvy it up when they get home.
Okay.
And that's how he breaks the siege. He's just, shut up, here's money, go away. Then he gets slammed for this.
Yeah,
like he
well.
bribed these guys, but he's got so much going on. Charles does. He's got all these guys trying to beat him up and take his crown.
Yeah.
And then he has to spend like the next. He ended up staying in power. Let's see, this is 845. He was in power through 877. So for 32 more years.
Okay.
So he wasn't ousted.
Maybe it was criticism, but he stuck
Yep.
around.
Now he winds up becoming emperor after this.
Yep.
He has to secure all of his lands, but the Vikings keep coming back.
Well, we heard we get paid.
Exactly. It's now just the threat of an invasion
Oh, no.
gets them coin. But Charles is smart. He says, okay, so the way they got past this is this river, there's these big bridges, but some of them are not very well made. he fortifies all the bridges across the entire kingdom. Like that becomes his goal. Make them out of stone, set up towers, more chains, because originally it was just the coast. Well, now he knows the Vikings are going to come in and deeper into our country.
Let's get those
this
bridges.
Is a threat. This actually ends up saving Paris itself 40 years later when the Vikings come back for a much bigger siege of Paris.
Oh.
That was involving like tens of thousands of Vikings. And Charles the Fat is the king. But what the result of that one is they're able to hold the city, but they let the Vikings settle in the lands around them. They basically bribe a very famous Viking warrior named Rollo. And Rollo settles in the northern chunk of France, and because he's a Northman, it becomes Normandy.
Oh.
And he becomes the first Duke of Normandy and like the great-great-grandfather of William the Conqueror.
Yeah.
So that, because the Vikings just wouldn't stop beating up Paris, they're like, here's some land, go away. We don't want to deal with you anymore.
Not gonna go away anywhere. Now just stay over there.
Stay over there. And they get them to be, by saying, you live here now, defend it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So now they have Vikings fighting Vikings.
Yeah,
Viking on Viking crime now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it's partially ingenious, but at the same time, like everybody's like, dude, you suck. You gave away land. That was
You
French
gave our
land.
stuff.
Why didn't you fight for it? And he's like, did you see the size of those guys? And they won't stop. Maybe now they'll stay here.
Stay here and fight each other.
And then that also causes problems with like England, because the Vikings go and raid in England and they just
Sure.
go to Normandy to hang out. So it's like they have like this weird camp set up. And the French are like, ha! No more Viking problem. And the English
You have the
hey,
Viking problem.
Hey!
We didn't have a Viking problem.
We didn't have as much of a Viking problem. They were just raiders. Now they have a base, and now
Yeah.
they're living here. This sucks. So the long-term impact of this is that it temporarily weakens Paris, and it makes their king look kind of bad. But he is inspired to build up the defenses. He realizes Paris can be this bulwark to protect deeper France. I mean, and you don't get much deeper than Paris. It's like right in the middle of France.
Yeah, right.
But the south is like not protected at all.
Why would we protect from
So
Vikings?
he's like, I need to protect this.
Sure.
And he's building all these bridges. It's good to build bridges, not walls.
Okay.
Remember, be a bridge builder.
Be a bridge builder.
Between your people. So yeah, so he's not only is he building defenses, that also having like good bridges is just that's good infrastructure.
Yeah, it's helpful.
It's a good infrastructure investment. So he gets kind of slammed for losing, but he made the Vikings leave rather than...
He made a choice.
He made a choice. It was a really tough one. It was throw some money at the problem and hope it goes away, which it did.
Or keep
and then it
dying
let
and-
him settle out all these other affairs and solidify his hold on the kingdom. So that's kind of his contribution to this, though, is he helps Paris get stronger and stronger to the point where now Paris is the center of France. Like for centuries after this, Paris just grows in power and becomes this massive center of trade. It becomes famous for its ability to defend itself. It's fortified, it's built up, people go to live there, and then the Vikings realize like we could maybe trade there.
Oh, if we don't keep beating them
We
up,
don't have to
could
beat them
probably...
up. Like now that we're not beating, and then Charles the Fat makes this smart move of settling the Vikings in the north. So now they have this warrior class of people that are loyal to the crown.
Right.
So it kind of grows into this whole like multicultural thing based all on this raid that was led by a pseudo mythical dude with fuzzy pants. And settled by just going, go away.
Huh.
Just go away, please. I have too much going on today. So for more information on these kinds of things, there's a really good book on the subject. It's just called The Vikings, and it's by
Vikings.
Elsa Rosedal. And it's kind of like a textbook, but
Okay.
it's a lot of information.
We'll be including that in the description.
Just include that. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, you can usually find chunks of that. I'm not sure if the whole thing is in one piece anymore, but it started being written in the 9th century, and they updated it all the way until like 1154.
Okay.
So this was like a living document. They started it by saying, this is what happened in England up till now. And this is what happened last week, and this is what happened last week, and this is what happened last week. And it's mixed with a lot of other books of the time to kind of compare ideas. There was the Domesday Book, which also talked about like farming and the cycles of the moon and all this other stuff. Kind of almanac, kind of a combination. So they are able to get a lot of information from those sources, which is really cool. And then if you're looking online, Wikipedia is actually just a great place to get started because you can always check the sources. And
Yes.
in the sources, you'll get tons of information about where to look. And then also Britannica Online. is a great source because that's an encyclopedia. But always, check and recheck.
Cross-checking
sources.
is a good idea.
Cross-checking is great. Do not watch the Vikings television show and think this is accurate because it's not.
Interesting.
It's fun, but the hairstyle is right.
Okay.
Big beards and Vikings actually they're considered like these hairy, gross barbarians. They're actually very fastidious about cleanliness.
I've heard that as well.
Which we talked about in
We did.
when the Vikings were bathing and they got ambushed by that king and they
Yeah.
got killed because they're trying to be clean. But they're big on grooming, different hairstyles. A lot of that stuff is pretty accurate. It's hard to tell because hair rots, it goes away. But yeah, so those
We
are your
gotta go,
sources.
Will.
Sorry, those are
We're
your
over time.
sources. Oh,
And-
and Norse sagas are cool too. That's
Right.
also good.
I'll include all their sources and
We'll
things you
include them
mentioned
all.
in
We'll
the
include them all.
description there. All right, well, that was the Vikings sacking Paris. They just took stuff. They didn't ever take over the city.
No, they
just
didn't.
sacked it.
They just took it.
Good
They
to know.
took stuff. If you're gonna conquer, I mean, like if you're not gonna conquer, just make sure you have a trophy.
Well, that's what you want anyway.
That's what you want.
All right, so next week we're moving on to a different
Different part of the world that we've not been.
continent.
Yes, this is a different continent.
Yeah, okay.
This is super far away. It's about as far away on the same chunk of land as you can get.
We're going to China.
China.
In 190 AD, April 9th, Dongzhuo
He burns Luoyang. It's a city.
burns Luoyang.
It's a city. He does not burn a guy. Although, if you burn a city, chances are you
Sure.
burn a couple people.
Well, we're going to find all about that.
We're gonna find
next
out
week. This is our
who's
first
Dongzhuo.
foray into
Going
China.
to China.
So that's exciting. So
Yep,
tune
I'm
in
excited
next
about
week. Like and subscribe and comment and stuff.
And next week I'll have the same facial hair, but thicker.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is
I might maybe I'll, in solidarity.
solidarity.
I
You
might
shave this bit.
see how I feel. We'll see how the
If
play
you're
goes.
all willing to shave in solidarity, Will will keep his beard as long as other people do it.
All right, we're over time. That's
Yeah,
my
well,
fault. Talk to you later.
All right.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Mike.